Reverend Hale arrives and interrupts the proctor's argument. The proctors are shocked to hear that Hale has just come from Rebecca Nurse's house. God forbid such a woman as Goody Nurse be charged, Hale says, but he then asks why she would be any less likely a suspect than anyone else. Hale says he's come on his own accord, in the hopes of determining the Christian character of the Proctor home. Hale questions Proctor about his failure to regularly attend church services, and then asks Proctor to recite the Ten Commandments. Proctor recites all but one. It is not until Elizabeth gently reminds him that John remembers the commandment forbidding adultery. Proctor then tells Hale of his conversation with Abigail Williams, in which she admitted there was no witchcraft, only mischief. Hale argues that he personally heard confessions from Tituba, Sarah Good, and numerous others. Proctor suggests that when the only other alternative is hanging, why wouldn't they confess? Hale tries to convince Proctor to testify in court. Giles Corey and Frances Nurse enter and reveal that their wives, Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, have been arrested. Reverend Hale's visit to each of the homes of the accused is in keeping with the time-tested Puritan tradition of prying into the personal lives of others. It is Hale's duty, he believes, to ferret out any unchristian-like behavior, and he gives Proctor a chance to prove his piety by reciting the Ten Commandments. Proctor's inability to remember the commandment forbidding adultery is another example of Proctor's denial of his own sin. This scene reveals that Hale has undergone his own role reversal. His door-to-door search for truth and his basic tendency toward fairness effectively removes him from a trial gathering energy and legitimacy from patently false claims. Proctor's questions to Hale regarding the trial go to the root of the hypocrisy of the proceedings. Why wouldn't Tituba, Sarah Good, and others confess to dealing with the devil if they must hang for denying it? There are them that will swear to anything before they'll hang. Have you never thought of that? Proctor asks Hale. Hale clearly has thought about such matters, but still believes in the power of the court, even when Proctor tells Hale about Abigail's pretense. When Giles Corey and Frances Nurse arrive and reveal that their wives have been arrested, Hale still maintains his faith in the system. That Goody Nurse and Martha Corey should be arrested without Hale's knowledge suggests that he has already lost control of the proceedings. Control has been assumed by a group of girls, taking their newfound power out for a murderous joyride. But, unwittingly, Hale supports the girls' charade. When asked to consider the ridiculous notion that Rebecca Nurse might be a witch, Hale asks Frances Nurse to remember, until an hour before the devil fell, God thought him beautiful in heaven. Hale has already passed his own judgment on Rebecca Nurse, that she is as fine and upstanding a citizen as Salem has to offer, and yet even he is hoodwinked into believing that if there be an accusation, there must be some truth in it. At this point in the story, Hale is still naive enough to believe that truth has a role to play in the trial. As we'll see, he couldn't be farther from it. Question 1. Why does Hale claim to have come to the Proctor home? To judge its Christian character, to garner information about Abigail, to arrest Elizabeth, to borrow a cross. Hale claims to have come to the Proctor home in order to judge its Christian character. Question 2. Which of the 10 Commandments is John unable to remember? Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Remember the Sabbath day. Honor thy father and thy mother. John Proctor fails to remember, thou shalt not commit adultery, the very sin he is guilty of. Question 3. Why does Proctor suggest that Tituba, Sarah Good, and numerous others have confessed? Because hanging is their only other option. Because they are guilty. Because Abigail is blackmailing them. Because God has revealed them. Proctor suggests that Tituba, Sarah Good, and numerous others have confessed because hanging is their only other option. Ezekiel Cheever and Marshall Herrick arrive at the Proctor house and apologetically provide a warrant for Elizabeth's arrest. Cheever reveals that Abigail Williams is Elizabeth's accuser. Cheever discovers the puppet Mary Warren gave Elizabeth and is shocked to discover a needle stuck into the puppet. It is proof, he says, supporting Abigail's story that Elizabeth's spirit stabbed her with a needle. Mary Warren is summoned and admits that Abigail sat beside her in court when she made the puppet and stuck the needle inside for safekeeping. Unconvinced, Cheever and Herrick take Elizabeth off to jail in chains. John demands that Mary Warren accompany him to court and retell the story of the puppet and the needle, but Mary says Abigail will kill her if she speaks a word of it. Mary then warns John that if he tries to say anything, Abigail will expose their affair. With the arrival of Cheever and Ezekiel, we see that Abigail Williams' plan to destroy Elizabeth and marry John is in full effect. The puppet Mary Warren gave to Elizabeth earlier in this act becomes the evidence Abigail knowingly manipulates for her own gain. But she had to stab herself with a needle to make the charge stick, evidence of just how far she was willing to go to achieve her sinister goal. Proctor sees the puppet story as an easy one to discredit. He assumes all it will take is Mary Warren telling the court what she already knew, that Abigail saw her making the puppet in court, and that Abigail must have devised the stabbing story to implicate Elizabeth. The only trouble is, Mary is terrified of incurring the wrath of Abigail. Remember the pointy reckoning promised in the first act? Mary has seen too much already to doubt Abigail was serious. John is forced to consider the limits of his own testimony. For Mary warns him Abigail will expose their adultery if he dares say a word. At the close of Act 2, Goody Proctor, Goody Nurse, and Martha Corey are in chains, headed to jail. And those that might help them are either like John Proctor, silenced by sinful shame, or like Reverend Hale, blinded by foolish faith. As Hale himself says, the jails are packed, our greatest judges sit in Salem now, and hangings promised. A bleak situation, if there ever was one. Question 1. Who is Elizabeth Proctor's accuser? Tituba, her husband John, Abigail Williams, Mary Warren. Abigail Williams is Elizabeth Proctor's accuser. Question 2. What is Cheever shocked to discover in the puppet Mary Warren gave to Elizabeth? Money, a needle, odd charms, Abigail's initials. Cheever is shocked to discover a needle in the puppet Mary Warren gave to Elizabeth. Question 3. John is forced to consider the limits of his own testimony because Elizabeth's life has been endangered. Tituba has threatened him with spells. His farm will be sabotaged. Abigail will expose their adultery. John is forced to consider the limits of his own testimony because Abigail will expose their adultery if he dares say a word.